Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on how to convert your in-person conference into an engaging virtual conference experience. My name is Emily Scahill. I'm the Manager of Peer Advocacy Supports and Services at MHA's National Office, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Some notes before I introduce you to our presenters. With a large number of people online, there may be a slight lag with the screen changing, so if the slides don't move forward on your screen immediately, don't worry, it's not on your end. Just give it a second. It should be fine. We are also recording this webinar, and I will send that out to everyone along with the slides in the next day or so. And last but not least, we've built in some time for a Q&A at the end. So in your Start Meeting window, there's a chat bubble, which you can click on to open up a messaging window. So feel free to drop any questions in there, and we'll go through some at the end. If you have tech questions as well, pop them in there. I will be moderating it the whole time, and I can help you out. And now I am so excited to introduce our three presenters for today, Stephanie, Trevor, and Amanda. Stephanie Francis is the Communications and Development Director for MHA for Greater Baton Rouge. She has worked in every aspect of nonprofit management and administration for more than 25 years, specializing in strategic partnership development and event planning. For the last 2 years, she has worked for MHA for Greater Baton Rouge, transforming the development department. She was also instrumental in helping to launch the annual conference, along with a partnership on the Opioid Education Project with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Her work has helped to fiscally stabilize the organization and prepare it for future funding challenges and opportunities. Trevor Calhoun is the Chief Executive Officer at Trusted Provider Network, a professional network specifically designed for licensed clinicians and vetted treatment providers to competently navigate client behavioral health. Prior to becoming CEO, he was CEO and Executive Chairman of StoreCentric. He is passionate about behavioral health and brings his experience from capital markets, corporate stewardship, and organizational leadership. Amanda Adams-Barney is a meeting and event specialist, producer, and stage manager. She has worked with nonprofit organizations and various corporations for more than 20 years, managing all aspects of meetings with 50 to 500 participants. Her clients include PBS, the Association of Immunization Managers, Course America, and numerous others. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters to get us started. I'm not sure who's starting, but Stephanie, Trevor, or Amanda, are you guys able to start?
I'm so sorry. I was on mute. Sorry.
No worries.
I didn't take myself off. Let me try again. Just want to say welcome again to everybody. Thank you. And before I get started talking about our organizational experience, I just want to tell you that I don't envy you having to make decisions. I think there is even more uncertainty now. I think the landscape is more complex than it was in mid-March and also more unpredictable. So Godspeed to you as you move forward and give yourself a little bit of a break, remembering that we are all making the best decisions we can with the information that we have at the time, which is changing on a regular basis. So I'm here today to talk about our experience converting our live conference into a virtual event. Like many of you who may have signed up for this call, I thought this task was really insurmountable and only available to high-tech industries with much more capacity than we have as a small nonprofit. We were very lucky to have a partner in TPN Network who convinced us otherwise. I can honestly say with one conference behind us that I feel empowered to potentially do it again in 2021 with a more robust platform, including exhibitors and keynote speakers and multiple tracks. I can tell you that it was extremely nice to get to the end of this event and not have to pay for one $20+ cup of hotel coffee. So I texted our executive director on March 9th and said, I think we may have to cancel or postpone our conference. We scheduled an executive committee call for the following Monday, the 16th. By the time we got to that date, the entire universe had changed and we'd already canceled our event. TPN was a sponsor of our live conference and approached us during that week and suggested that they would help us take it virtually. As I said, we weren't sure that that was possible for us, but talking through the process with them and talking through it internally, we came to the point, and 2.5 weeks before our live event, we put out a registration for our virtual event, which was taking place the same day, so that the same days. So that was April 6th and 7th, beginning of April. We had, you can see there kind of the history of that. We had stalled out, so we knew that people were waiting to see what had happened before they committed to coming to the live event. Why did we do it? We know that our audience is dependent on the CEU opportunities. We launched this event 3 years ago and we've had great growth with it. And we know that people in their cycle of CEUs, which is a July to June fiscal year, that they depend on our conference. We also had several sponsors come to us and say that we could carry over the sponsor dollars to the 2021 conference. But with all the unknowns at that time, we felt like anything that we could do to capture those sponsor dollars in our 2020 fiscal year, we needed to seize that opportunity, and having the virtual conference allowed us to do that. Who helped us? I've already mentioned the TPN network has been great, and you're going to hear from Trevor on this. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our speakers. I'm going to beat them up a little bit later in this presentation, not really, but they were great to go on this journey with us. And then also our board, who worked with us quickly to get the reapproval for this live event. I've already told you the date of it, but because we opted to keep our original live conference dates, we went with a very straightforward, basic approach. We only had one track of speakers. We surveyed our speakers and asked who would be interested in speaking in a virtual format versus the live conference. We had 8 of them answer in the affirmative that they were interested in that, and so we moved forward with those 8. They were self-selected, and we did not use any of our keynote speakers. They were otherwise occupied. We had our senior senator and various other people who were very engaged in other things at the time. So all of our presentations were just an hour long. We put a very simple, as I said, simple format in there. The speakers that we had that were 2 hours long, we just did not ask them to participate, thinking that was just too long to speak on a particular topic. We added 2 speakers to round out the 10 hours, and those were particularly relevant to the unfolding situation, or the continuing to unfold situation with COVID-19. And then we deeply, deeply discounted the registration. This happened before any of the programs were out, the unemployment, the PPP loans, and we knew that our behavioral health professionals in the region were greatly impacted, so we took the cost way down, and we were able to do that with our sponsorship and with TPN Network. So it was $55 for 10 CEUs, including 4 of ethics. We ended up, for a variety of reasons, very heavy in the ethics. So that was a great bargain for us. But by moving forward, we were able to retain all of our sponsors, and we even picked one up at the last minute who was so impressed that we were making it happen. We had 217 registrants for the initial conference. As we were planning this conference, the Small Business Administration came out with the PPP loans. Those questions came up within our conference forums on the chat side, and so quickly after that was over, we put together with TPN again 2 short format webinars that were free to any participants on that particular topic, and we had 211 people for those. Lessons learned. Goodness, there were so many of those, and we're continuing to absorb those. But these are taken really from our evaluations. And for those of you who are in the conference business, which I would think is most of you on this, it was very refreshing because, number one, there were no food complaints. And number 2, not one of the 217 meeting rooms was too cold or too hot. But what our real takeaway was, most of our attendees were just incredibly grateful for the effort and understood that we were all learning in real time, and they were gracious about the technical glitches that happened. The response was reaffirming to us as we only, of course, saw the flaws and the improvements that could be made. And as I said before, I think you actually have the harder task in front of you as expectations rise. So a list of a few items in this. I think if we had to do it all over again, the production value of this event is as important, if not more important, than in a live event, and that's why we added Amanda Adams-Barney to this conversation today. We would have definitely spent some more time with our speakers. The technical challenges caused really cut into some of the sessions, as you saw with me not unmuting myself when I started today. And so that was challenging and very obvious. Our attendees had challenges with the technology throughout. And I know that there's different ways to address that, some are more difficult than others. We didn't have a cohesive theme. As I said, we had 8 speakers and then we added 2. And because they were self-selected, it was not really themed, or we didn't make more of an effort to weave it together, which I wish we would have. We did highlight our sponsors, but we could have done more there, including running ads in the breaks, which would have killed 2 birds with 1 stone. The CEUs were a challenge. I'm going to talk more about that going forward. People expected them automatically. And then we also didn't consider, and I think this is a learning going forward, that when people sit down in front of their computer versus a hotel ballroom, their expectations of the level of entertainment are different. And so I think that was reflected in our evaluations. Trevor, who is the CEO of TPN, has done 30 of these, so I'm going to kick it over to him to talk about broader lessons outside of just our event.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. This was really our first event post-COVID, and since then we've done about 30. And it's been a wonderful learning experience for us, and to bring a really organic and natural experience to the attendee. But I think really what's most important is to understand is to be patient, and to be patient with your attendees. You will find, as someone who puts this on, and as we host these with other organizations, there's a lot of user errors and a lot of need for customer support, more than we anticipated. Technology will hammer some of that out, but at the end of the day, it's good old blocking and tackling through the process. We found that a lot of attendees that would come naturally just wouldn't read what was presented to them, and so they would need someone to talk to and see how the process would go. But I think that really hits a lot of those points, and we can go to the next slide. Some of the things to think about before you begin, and one I'll highlight that's really not put in here, these events we all know are put on to generate money for organizations like MHA, and you really have to start thinking about what do you want to net out. The world has really changed in terms of what your net is out of your gross, because on a digital landscape, your net is a lot larger of the gross than it was in a live in person. Next thing you want to think about is who do you want to attend your virtual event? Is this, so then once you know who you have to attend your virtual event, you kind of start to figure out who you want as your audience. Most of the people on here might already have an event that was live and they just need to convert. So that question would be answered. Other things to consider is the virtual platform you want to use. We'll go through this later, but there is a process of the level of engagement that you want. You can go from just a conference room event, which really is the style we're on right now, or a webinar, which is kind of what we're on right now, to a full, robust, engaging conference experience where you feel like you're in a virtual conference environment. And that's really up to you. Those capabilities are there, and they're not unattainable. Obviously, thinking about when the date will be, we encourage folks to, if they had a date already set, to just keep to that date and convert it over. I think we were close on that with MHA Baton Rouge. Why are you hosting the event? What is the purpose? Really understand what's the driving force around this, and how are you going to host a webinar? Who will be doing it? Will this be a live event? Will this be pre-recorded? And all those things. And we'll get into that a little further through here. Is this mine as well? I'll keep going. Really what you need to think about here is your goals and your timelines, what your budget is. I talked about this prior, really thinking that the cost parameters have really changed here. I know it's challenging and it's a different environment, but you also should think about the advantages of a digital conference in this COVID environment is you can charge less and you might be able to make more on a net basis. You really have to think about your registration system and rates. Talked about rates a bunch here. Stephanie and her group were I thought, very intelligent about this, is really charging a less of a fee to attract more people, but also at the end of the day, probably generate more for her organization. What system are you using? This is important because this could turn into a mess for you. As people register for your conference, you need to track them all the way through. And when I mean all the way through, they register, they attend the conference, they get their unique conference ID to come in. You don't want someone to have multiple access points, so people that didn't pay can come in. And if this is a CE event that people are looking for credits, you need to track that they went through the process, that they did the proper regulatory things they needed to, like a survey and maybe even a quiz, and then you can track that digitally and then also send them a CE at the end. For Stephanie's event, she'll get into this, but she opted to send them herself. We now do that just digitally and can track that entire process. Also, what's important is the audience. Is this a members-only thing? Is this open to the public? That's really important for related to the registration system. If it's open to the public, a lot of that registration system isn't really important. You don't need to track. Content and speakers, we'll get into prepping speakers in a little bit, but really thinking about the experience for the people on what content you're bringing and the speakers that you're doing, and that the speakers are prepared to talk in this environment to talk really to themselves almost when they're talking. Some of the times they're not seeing the other side of the screen and they're not getting that engagement as they would in a live audience. So we'll talk a little bit about tools you can use to get that engagement. But for some people it's difficult, and you need to think about that, and they need to be prepped for that and do some kind of run-throughs. Other things to consider is if this is a C event, course descriptions, the learning objectives you're trying to do, also the pre-approval for CEs and stuff like that. We can go to the next slide. This is more of a continuation of the slide before, but really special considerations for a virtual event. Timing, what platform are you using. We'll get into detail about platforms, different platforms to use. I'll give you the platforms that we use. We used to use Zoom. We've moved away from Zoom to a more robust platform that's more engaging. We talked a little bit about speakers. Speakers is, you want someone who's done this before. If you're talking with your speakers that haven't done it before, that's fine. It's going to take a little bit. And really it's confidence and a little hand-holding just to make them feel comfortable. If they've talked in front of a room of 50 to 100 people, they're going to be fine to transition. They just need a little hand-holding and help through that process. If you're going to do sponsors, exhibitors, that's really tied into what platform you're using. And again, we'll get into some platforms, but you can really build a robust experience where the attendees can engage with the sponsors and the exhibitors. And the really cool thing is you can give that data to the sponsors and exhibitors of, so-and-so came to your booth, and they talked, here's the information, here's how long they were there, here's a lead contact for you if you want it. That stuff's available now that wasn't available, obviously, in a live event. CEs, we have the capability to do a clean CE process of from the beginning to the end of being able to distribute the CE certificate to those whom qualified through the event to do that. I'll pass over tech, but I really want to talk about customer support because this is a huge item. You will have a nightmare on your hands if you really don't think about this before, if you don't think about a strategy, if you don't have a platform that can handle this, and the platform would really have the ability to track all the members or attendees that are coming through and match with customer support questions that they have and readily help them out. The more unorganized you're on the front, the more headache you're going to have on the back end, and that really ties into the attendee tracking as well.
Emily, before we go forward, Amanda's screen is saying that, speaking of technical glitches, is saying that she's not unmuted.
All right, let me double check on that. She should have been, but if she got bumped out and called back in, then she might have been bumped out.
Great. Well, but while we're waiting on her, she was going to talk about the slide, but I'm happy to do it. Just wanted to reiterate that the timing is everything. I think that this going forward, that's going to be even more true as the expectations are different. But also, as we certainly experienced, one live conference day does not necessarily equal one virtual day, particularly if you do one track, and that you have different, even if you do a more robust platform where you've got exhibitors and things with sponsors, people are moving around within that virtual world in a different way, and you can do less than you can in really a live conference. Other considerations are the time of day for the event. If it's a national event, you've got multiple, like this one, you've got multiple time zones to deal with. You've also got situations where people are going to want to eat lunch and they're going to need breaks. So you have to factor those in. Session length probably really varies on the subject matter. We find that both in the live and the virtual, an hour works really well, which is about 55 minutes of the actual conference, in the actual presentation, a few questions, and then a break for break for attendees. And the breaks do present another opportunity. Not only do they present an opportunity for your attendees to get up and do things that they need to, which are different in a virtual environment. They might want to change laundry or fix a bite to eat. But this is also an opportunity for you to run ads for your sponsors or run ads for different features of your organization that you have coming up. So this gives we didn't do anything. As I said, the production value for ours and the turnaround time was a little bit low, and we didn't do anything with these breaks other than have dead space. And in hindsight, it would have been great to have more, I guess, video or entertainment type things during that, and to feature our sponsors. Next
so Stephanie,
slide.
from our end, Amanda is unmuted. So if she is muted, it looks like her microphone is off, but I can't unmute her from our end. So it's on her end.
Okay.
So I'll pick up virtual conference platforms. There's a tremendous amount of options here, and it can be very confusing. Really what we've done on the TPN aspect of, we've done a lot of work of going through and testing all of these conference platforms and seeing what's best. We've been on Zoom, we've been on BlueJeans, we've been on Microsoft's and Oracle. We've now moved to a new platform which is GoToWebinar. We really like this platform. But it's really a question of what do you need, what you're trying to accomplish. For example, for Stephanie's conference at MHA Baton Rouge, we were putting together this quickly for them. It was really in the beginning for us, and we ran it on Zoom, and there wasn't a lot of bells and whistles for that. That capability has really exploded on our side of what we can do and create. But you also have to set the expectations of your attendees and what they want, what they're looking for. You know, if this is, we've run events for a 10-people attendee conference to, we did one on Tuesday for 250 people, and that was a 3-hour CE event, to a 9-hour Saturday telemental health all-day conference, which is just a lion of an event with about 300 attendees. So there's many ways to go about it, and then you can go, and we'll show pictures in a second about doing a massive conference, and we could do up to 5,000 people in a massive conference, which is a virtual experience, and I'll hold that until we get to that piece of what that's all about. But it's really what you can afford, which really is driven by what you want to generate for your organization in terms of income or gross profit, because there's not a lot of upfront costs unless you want to do this by yourself and not use someone like us or another organization to run it for you, because it's just a small fee to do that on that process. Really, the next question is important is, how much time and bandwidth do you have to produce the event? What does your team look like currently? And if your team is new, then you probably should look for help to handle that process for your bandwidth. If you're taking a conference that you had set up live that might happen at the end of June, and you have all the dates set, and you just need to convert it over digitally, that's something that you probably could handle on your own, but I would suggest, maybe working with someone to do so. And then, are you expecting dollars and support from sponsors and exhibitors? Stephanie had wonderful relationships in Baton Rouge that helped her and her group out. And they didn't have a lot of expectations from what we understood from our standpoint of digital display and all this, marketing events during the theme. But if your sponsors want that you have the capabilities to do that and show the sponsors, have them maybe if they're exhibitors to get leads from your attendees and interact with your attendees, and also have that capability. We can go to the next slide. These are some of the end-to-end tools that you can use. I've talked a little bit about them, but you'll see one, and I'll talk to the ones that we use. We use Workcast. That's really for creating a full, robust conference experience. We still use Zoom a little bit on smaller conferences, but on probably conferences that are greater than 50, we now like to use GoToWebinar, which I guess is not listed here, but you can contact me for more information about that one. We can go to the next slide. These are just examples of the level that I talked about earlier of conferences. A webinar and a workshop. What we're doing right now is a webinar. There is not a lot of features of engagement going on with this conference that we're physically putting on with you all at MHA right now. But it really is a webinar where there are two levels. On the left is actually a picture of the event that we did, which was on Zoom, which was a webinar where you actually see, and you'll see Stephanie's face in the top right of the left picture, and there will be some engagement tools that we'll talk about in a second that you can use this. And then on the right is really used for a smaller conference, maybe 10 people, 20 people, where everybody is seen. There's a master controller or a host that would control audio. There's a lot of engagement, but as you get bigger numbers, these aren't really practically not really practical applications for larger numbers, but really good for small groups. We can go to the next slide. This is really the future here. This next slide, if we can make it bigger, is really the virtual events. This is where you open up, you walk in, and you look like you're at a conference, and it's really cool. We're starting to do this with conferences that are coming up this month and several in June, where an attendee comes in. They can go to the auditorium webinar when you have a guest speaker coming in. They can go to the exhibit hall and interact with the exhibits. When you go into the exhibitor hall, you can visit the exhibits. If the exhibitor wants to have a live person chat there, they can have that person there, or they can leave a video to display what they're doing and how they want to interact. In the middle, they would go to their own personal schedule of what track they're on and all the conferences breakouts that they're going to. On the right of that, you'll see the chat room. That's really a networking room for you to chat with other folks, and it interacts and follows you as you go through the experience. And then obviously on the right is the help desk, and then underneath you'll see the sponsors. Those are just examples of sponsors. Sony, Barclays, and so on and so forth. And then there's more stuff. You can view your personal agenda there. But it just makes a very robust experience and gets as close as you can get to, without having a virtual reality mask on, I guess, if you will, to being in a conference. And we think it's really cool. And I think you're going to see this a lot depending on how long and far we're into this COVID period. We can go to the next slide.
And Trevor, can you hear me?
Yeah, we just can't hear you now.
Hi, folks. It's Amanda. And
yeah.
I'm finally here. And so happy to join you. Let me speak about a few things. Online is not the same as in person. Well, we have completely experienced that in the last few minutes. But in particular, I want to address it from the perspective of your speakers and your attendees. Their experience, you need to, when you are planning one of these virtual events, be it an awards presentation or a full-blown conference, you really need to realize that everyone is experiencing it differently. So even your speakers who may be super pros, they get on that stage, they're dancing, they're cracking jokes. Well, if they're doing an online presentation where no one is speaking back to them, where they're just speaking, that experience is not going to be the same. The same way for attendees. There are a lot more distractions when you're sitting in your quote-unquote home office, which might be your kitchen, it might be your back porch or patio, it could be, your bathroom for all we know. There are a lot more distractions, and we need to, as organizers, really think about how we can reach people. It really changes your content planning, and you need to plan for those things for sure. And not be afraid to say to those presenters, hi, we know you're an expert, but let's take some time to think about how we do this differently. And that content also is going to be received in a different way, and the technology will be have different expectations today than it will in 3 or 6 or 9 months. People right now understand we're all new to it. They're much more forgiving, but as we get into the fall and into people have experienced it for a longer time, they're going to expect things that are more polished, that run more smoothly, etc. One of the things that you can help yourself is to record in advance your sessions. So if you're doing a a practice session with a presenter, record that. What if today I was the only presenter on this session and the technology wasn't working? I couldn't connect like I couldn't for the first half of the presentation. Well, that would have been a really huge thing. If it had been recorded, we could have rolled that tape and worked out the technology behind the scenes, and then I could have joined live when that was possible. Also, you can record your sessions for posterity, which is awesome. You can do it cheaply and easily, and then you have that to put up on your website or to make in a special members-only section to make that information available at a later date. A lot of times recording when we're live in person is very expensive, getting a camera crew, etc. You don't have to worry about that here. So there are a couple of things that you can certainly do during your sessions to keep people's attention. You can do polls, Q&As, chats, hand raising. A lot of that depends on, and Emily, we'll take the next slide now, would be awesome. And a lot of times, there are options for things that you can do built into the platform that you're using. So when you're selecting your platform, this is definitely a feature that you want to look for, and make sure, see how robust these options are, because those are the kinds of things that are going to keep your attendees engaged, keep them sitting in front of their computer instead of wandering off in the middle of the material. It's really important. We can go on. So speakers, I would like to talk a little bit more about this in particular. I will just say that I come from a background, I produce the general sessions for PBS at their annual meeting, and we're in sessions quite a bit in their general session. Over the course of 2 days, we probably have about 10 hours of general sessions, maybe 12 or 15, depending on the year. And for those 2 days in the general sessions, we rehearse for 4 days beforehand. So obviously, I come from this perspective that rehearsal is really important to a well-running event. There is nothing more important other than your actual technology working, but than having your speakers fully prepared for their virtual presentation. That means lots of practice. You can, as I just referenced, you can also record those practice sessions as a backup for tech failures. And if you need a reason to get that particularly prickly speaker into a rehearsal session, that's a great reason. You can say, listen, we're not really rehearsing, we're just pre-recording. And then they get to check it out and make sure that all their technology works. It also, obviously, we need to make sure that the tech is working, that speaker or that their camera is at the appropriate height, that it's appropriately lit, that their microphone works and is clear. So all of those things you can do in those rehearsal sessions, which really means that you need to have them well enough in advance of your presentation to make some adjustments if they're needed. You need to be able to get them a light if they're ill lit. You need to ask them to change their background if that's a mess, whatever the situation is. I also would highly encourage you to have a moderator. Emily is doing a great job today. She is there to help with transitions if needed. She kicked us off when we were having tech issues. She's helping behind the scenes to try to get that working. So, it really is important. Finally, for larger events with multiple speakers, multiple events, consider a stage manager just as you might for an in-person meeting. That person can be a tech stage manager and working on phones, email, messaging, et cetera, to try to help keep your speakers on track and keep them moving forward, making sure they're ready and helping your presentation be seamless. I think now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to speak about sponsors and exhibitors.
Yes, I think that we, thanks, I'm glad you could join us. I think that we definitely found that unexpectedly our sponsors were and continue to be really excited that we proceeded and that we put content out, even though we had a smaller crowd than we were anticipating. I think that was because it was very early days, but they were thrilled. And as I said, we even had one that joined us late because that they were just glad to be part of something that was really happening and for behavioral health professionals. There's lots you can do to support your sponsors, even in a virtual event, even though it's quite different than the live experience. I mean, everybody knows the list of putting them on your landing and your registration pages. We've talked about rolling, allowing them to roll commercials. Somebody in the chat room had the brilliant idea of rolling success stories in those breaks. They could be success stories brought to you by your sponsors. So I think that's a great use to promote both your organization but also your sponsors. You can allow your sponsors, of course, opportunities to speak, whether that's really as a presenter or before the events to welcome people. We did give our largest sponsor that opportunity with the virtual conference. They were otherwise busy and opted not to take us up on that offer, but we did put it out there. And then as Trevor discussed, in those higher end platforms, there are opportunities for exhibitors to take place, and that could be another thing that you offer your sponsors, so to have both of those things. And there's lots of interactivity opportunities within those virtual exhibit halls, and it can be attractive to your exhibitors and your sponsors as well because the costs are lower to them for the actual event. They're not traveling, they're not sending people out of the office. This is something that they can do in the office and maybe have 2 or 3 people that are monitoring it without having to take them totally out of the office. And of course, there's always the savings on the candy that they put out. So as the next slide, Emily, is just a if you'll go to the next slide, is just so you can see what we put out, like the first couple of days as people were populating the conference. We had that up so that people could see that before we even started and as they joined us. All right, and the next slide. So the continuing education, this was really a sticking point for us. For us personally, we felt ethically bound to put out the exact number of CEU hours that people earned within the conference. So different from a live conference, you will have a reporting, I believe on most platforms. We use the Zoom webinar. That was a question on here. We use Zoom webinar, and we ended up with an official report of not only how many hours, or actually how many minutes, people participated, and you can see when they call in and out, but also their level of participation. Were they answering polls? Were they, doing the quizzes at the end, or did they just log in and go on to other activities? So it's a bit tricky, I think, because from an auditing perspective, you will now have that information. It's not like you're going back to a live conference and you don't really know if they went to the event or not. So I think that is something that will continue to evolve as these platforms evolve. For our conference, I was very lucky to have my stuck-at-home college student who culled through all the attendee reports, added up all the minutes, translated them to hours, and then paired the report with our evaluation and their addresses so we could send out those CEUs. I say I was especially lucky because she was cheap, and also apparently anything is more attractive than microeconomics. For shorter webinars, I think it's easier because it's just a couple of hours and people aren't necessarily logging in and out as much, and I think you can feel freer to just automatically issue a certificate, and I know that's the way that TPN is now doing it. So that's a conversation that you can also have with your regulating bodies. And I suspect that that will continue to evolve as the situation evolves and as we take more things online. The other question that we have going forward and that we've posed to our regulating bodies is if we are indeed unethically bound CEUs, then if we issue a blank CEU or issue the whole 10 hours to people and they report the same even though they know they didn't do that, does the audit, if there is an audit, does it reflect on us or is it on them? So those are conversations that I would encourage you to have as you go forward, and also something to consider as you're choosing a platform, a registration application, and then an evaluation medium. We used 3 different ones for all of those, and so that's really was also part of what presented our challenges going forward. But nevertheless, we have issued all our certificates. I'm happy to report that everybody has one of those in their hands now.
Trevor back. I'll talk a little bit about technology and also just because we're talking about CEs, talk about that. Since we've done, Stephanie, the Behavioral Health Conference, we work with Tulane on their process of, and what they've been actually doing for years is this electronic process of really being able to monitor them coming through. They could take a survey and or they could take a quiz. And we can, there's an algorithm that digitally matches with their participation level, and then automatically, if they pass those refactoring that we've set, then they would get sent a certificate. So if you don't have the human capital to handle it by yourself, or or a lovely college student at home during this time, it works quite well, and there's a lot of really digital integrity through the process. And that's the wonderful thing about this change. If we can look at some positive aspects through this COVID change, there's some digital things through these onlines that can make your life a little bit easier and maybe scale you and your teams a little more. And really on the registration process, I've talked about this before, but really having a registration process that is the same platform that runs from the beginning to the end. You don't want to have many platforms that don't talk to each other. You really want to have one. You also need to ensure that the information gets to the people. That really means that they come in with their email. That's their email ID going through. They might have a password to get into the conference that's unique to them, and they will maintain that through the whole process. The process gets off the train tracks if they use a different email, and I talked about that earlier in terms of user error, which will occur, and we're humans and we make mistakes, and we just have to be prepared for that. But as we've really spent a lot of time creating the most elegant system to map these people through, attendees through the process. Someone, like Amanda to help assist through the platform. This is very important. We're doing a 7-track conference in the first week of June. We anticipate about 800 members. We have 7 of our people that are moderators that are attached to each attendee that talks at that time. That's very important to have someone assist through that time, because you really want your speaker focusing on giving the presentation, and you want your moderator focusing on the engagement aspects with the audience, either questions that come through, hands that are raised. Here's an example here. I mean, Amanda on this call wasn't able to use her mic for whatever various reasons, and Emily came in as a moderator and helped that out. It's very important to have that. And that's one thing that technology can't really fix right now. We're not in the AI world of Westworld. We really need real people to kind of hold the speaker's hand through the entire process and be attached to somebody. And then also that tech person who's available really from the beginning to the end. I mean, from them signing up to all the way to the end.
All right, so keys to success. They're not all that different from what you do with an in-person meeting. I definitely think set appropriate expectations with your attendees. If it is going to be a Zoom call that is more low-tech, let them know that. Let them know, if it's going to be something where it's a CE process and they need to participate in all the hours of it to get their CEU credits at the end, then, that's something you need to let them know. So setting those expectations in advance with your attendees will definitely help. Utilizing the right platform for your level of event. Again, determining what you want to deliver. Do you need to divide it up among different tracks, different types of attendees, different skill levels, different, goals or working groups? There are ways within a greater, broader perspective to have conversations among people. That doesn't need to stop just because you've taken it virtual. It just needs to mean that you need to pick the right platform for your event. Trevor just said it. I've said it. I think that's so key. Have plenty of help on the back end, the people behind the scenes who are making it happen, because without that, you're done if people can't access the information. Practice, 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 practice. I can't preach it enough. Make sure even that prickly speaker that is a diva and thinks they have everything down, trust me, they haven't necessarily used whatever platform you're using. They haven't done what you wanted them to do before. So, be insistent, take the time. I promise you it will pay off. I will also say, and it's not here, but don't give up your bells and whistles. In fact, this might be a time to add more of it. And don't think that it all has to be technology related. You can still mail things to people. You can send people documents in advance that they need to download. Having things come to them in multiple formats really will help them stay engaged. It will help them to, really digest the material that you want them to digest. So be a little freer. As Stephanie said, you don't have to buy that $90 cup of coffee for them. So instead, think of creative ways, and someone like me or Trevor, people who have experience with this are happy to help you brainstorm those ideas, help you to come up with other ideas, use things that we've done for other folks. So do that, and then have the right team in place. Make sure that, if you're the planner, this doesn't all of a sudden become a one-man show. Please take this back to your boss and whatever and say, hey, on this webinar, they said I need other people. So I still need access to the IT guy who normally sets up our computers on site. Hey, I still need, all this other help to make this happen. And I think that brings us to questions and answers.
Great. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Yes, we do have time for a few questions. So as I said, participants are welcome to ask questions in the chat box. We do have a few already, so we can get started now. Early on, you mentioned expectations being different for a virtual conference versus in person, and a few people wanted you to elaborate on what you meant by that.
I saw that oh, go ahead, Amanda.
No, Stephanie, go. I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, I saw that in there. I think that when you are not face-to-face interacting, and particularly with your speakers, that when you can't see them or touch them, you need to add other things. Amanda talked about polls and the interactivity there. The chat space is great, so you can get a sense of what you're forgetting to speak to, but also people like to see the speakers move around. They like to see a little bit of a more recorded video. They're used to watching TV and movies on their computer, and so I think that's not that you're going to reach quite that, the level of Netflix, but that's the expectation.
Yeah, and I will jump in there and echo that, in that, again, you have now taken your event from an in-person meeting to a digital medium. What people experience in a digital medium is different. They experience fast, especially in today's world, fast-paced. It's quick-moving. It's polished. So I do think that attendees, whether they even know it or not, and most of them don't know it in advance, it just gets reflected after the fact in our, surveys, satisfaction surveys. But people expect a different product. They expect you to be moving and be polished and well rehearsed. So I think that those kinds of things are very important, as well as much as you can maintain the interactivity of an event. That is certainly something that is different between online versus digital, in person versus digital. When you're in person, you can walk up to that speaker and afterwards and ask that question that you had that you didn't want to shout out, or et cetera. So working for ways to make that happen is important as well.
Great. On a similar note to doing things differently in the virtual world, what about virtual networking sessions? How would those be structured? Are there certain pros and cons to those?
I think, this is Trevor, I think the pros and cons is really getting the attendees into the virtual room and having them comfortable with that. And really ways to do that is the platform that we're using really engages in the event, because we also know when you go to a live event, people are on their they're texting and they're sitting in the conference room, and so you can do that as well. I have been looking at the Q&A. These virtual events are, they're not open box and enter. There is some functionality that has to be built in, and they're really only and if you could follow me for a second, they're only a front end tool. You would still have to use either what we use as a platform is GoToWebinar to do the actual casting of the event, or go to Zoom to do the casting of the event, and you have to build APIs into them, so they're not that user friendly, and they're expensive. So if you're thinking about doing a virtual event and you don't have the tech background or the team, you really need to partner with a group to do so. And help you out. But if you have that, then it should be pretty easy to put together, and more cost effective as it relates to what you would pay for a hotel conference room or something of that aspect.
Right. I will
Speaking of that,
Emily,
could you put the contact information up, and then go ahead, Amanda. Just if Emily could put the content there we go. Yep.
Perfect. So I was just going to say. I agree with Trevor in that, any of these platforms that we have been talking about, there is a cost to them, but you're also realize that you're not paying for either your hotel meeting room or your food and beverage, or the cost for your staff to travel, the cost for your speakers, attendees to travel. So there is a trade-off there, but also realize that you're not it's not plug and play. You do need to do work in setting it up. You need to do work in, deciding how you want it all to flow and all of those kinds of things. There are also other workarounds. It doesn't have to be one of these glitzy, glammy things. You could do smaller, Zoom meetups for kind of networking groups, that kind of thing that you can build into your time of your conference. There are different ways to approach it. I will echo probably, I'll give my own pitch, or I'll pitch for all of us at the moment, that, our information is there on the screen. You're welcome to contact any one of us. We're happy to help. We're happy to guide you through this process because, it can seem daunting. It can seem daunting. I get that. But I hope that Stephanie and her story has said, it's entirely doable.
Wonderful. So we'll wrap there. We're a little after 3:15. If anyone has questions that we didn't get to, you're welcome to reach out to our presenters. Like they said, we have the slide up now with their contact info. So thank you guys for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We especially appreciate your patience with the tech issues we ran into. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I will be in touch with everyone probably early next week to get you all the recording and a copy of the slides. And I will also include Stephanie, Trevor, and Amanda's contact info in case anyone misses grabbing it right now. Other than that, stay safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.